Long before there was a country called the United States, the land we now call America was home to a wide variety of indigenous peoples. These native tribes, such as the Iroquois in the northeast, the Cherokee in the southeast, the Sioux across the Great Plains, and the Navajo in the southwest, had rich traditions, languages, and ways of life. They lived in harmony with the land, hunting, farming, and trading for thousands of years. In 1492, an Italian explorer named Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish flag, crossed the Atlantic Ocean and landed in the Caribbean. While he never reached what is now the United States, his voyages opened the door to a wave of European exploration. By the early 1500s, Spanish explorers like Juan Ponce de Leon and Hernando de Soto had set foot in parts of modern-day Florida and the southeastern US, searching for gold and new territories. The early 1600s marked the start of lasting European settlements in what is now the US. In 1607, the English established Jamestown in Virginia, the first permanent English colony. Life was tough. The settlers faced harsh winters, food shortages, and conflict with local tribes. But over time they adapted and the colony survived. Not long after, more colonies were formed. The Pilgrims arrived in 1620 on the Mayflower and founded Plymouth Colony in Massachusetts. They sought religious freedom and formed an agreement called the Mayflower Compact, one of the earliest steps towards self-government in America. By the 1700s, 13 British colonies had grown along the eastern coast. These colonies were rich in resources and grew quickly, attracting settlers from Europe who were looking for a new life. But the colonists still lived under the rule of Britain, and that control became a growing problem. The American Indians, meanwhile, were being pushed off their lands. Disease brought by Europeans decimated their populations, and their way of life began to disappear. As European settlements expanded, native tribes were forced to move, often by violence or unfair treaties. Then came a tipping point. Britain began imposing heavy taxes and new laws on the colonies, which had no representatives in the British Parliament. The colonists grew angry. Protests broke out. A group called the Sons of Liberty led demonstrations like the Boston Tea Party, where they dumped British tea into the harbour to protest taxation. In 1775, war erupted between the colonists and the British. This was the start of the American Revolutionary War. A year later, on July 4, 1776, the colonies declared their independence by signing the Declaration of Independence, written mostly by Thomas Jefferson. It boldly stated that all men are created equal and that the colonies had the right to be free. George Washington, a respected general, led the colonial army. The war was long and difficult, but in 1783 the British surrendered and the colonies were finally free. A new country was born, the United States of America. At the beginning, the US was fragile. The first government system, the Articles of Confederation, was weak. In 1787, leaders gathered in Philadelphia to write a new document, the US Constitution. This became the foundation of American democracy, setting up 3 branches of government and ensuring basic rights for its citizens. In 1789, George Washington became the first president. He helped shape the presidency and warned against dividing the nation into political parties. From these early struggles, the United States began to grow, not just in land, but in ideas, technology, and identity. After the American Revolution, the United States was a young but ambitious country. People dreamed of moving westward into the vast lands beyond the original 13 colonies. The idea of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were meant to expand across the continent, began to take hold. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson made a major move by buying the Louisiana Territory from France, doubling the size of the country. The Lewis and Clark expedition soon followed, mapping out this new land all the way to the Pacific Ocean. People moved westward, building towns, farms, and railroads. But as the nation expanded, deep conflicts began to emerge, especially around the issue of slavery. The southern states depended on enslaved African Americans to work on plantations, especially growing cotton and tobacco. The northern states, where slavery was being phased out, began to push for abolition, the complete end of slavery. In 1820, Congress passed the Missouri Compromise to try to balance the number of slave and free states. But tensions only grew. The abolitionist movement spread, with leaders like Frederick Douglass, a former slave who became a powerful speaker and writer, and Harriet Tubman, who helped hundreds escape slavery using the Underground Railroad. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. He opposed the expansion of slavery. In response, 11 southern states seceded, forming the Confederate States of America. This led to the American Civil War, one of the darkest times in U.S. history. From 1861 to 1865, Americans fought against each other. The Union North battled the Confederacy South. More than 600,000 people died. Lincoln's famous Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 declared that all enslaved people in Confederate areas were free. This gave the war a new purpose, not just to save the Union, but to end slavery. In 1865, the Union won. Slavery was officially abolished through the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. But healing the country was not easy. Lincoln was assassinated just days after the war ended. The Reconstruction era tried to rebuild the South and bring justice to former slaves, but racism and violence remained deeply rooted. By the late 1800s, the US was transforming again. New inventions like the telephone by Alexander Graham Bell and the light bulb by Thomas Edison were changing daily life.
Millions of immigrants arrived from Europe seeking opportunity and freedom. They passed through places like Ellis Island in New York, near the Statue of Liberty, which became a symbol of hope. Cities grew rapidly with factories, railroads and skyscrapers. But life in these cities was not always easy. Workers faced long hours and dangerous conditions. Children worked in mines and mills. Reformers like Jane Addams and labor leaders like Samuel Gompers fought for better conditions. In 1914, World War I broke out in Europe. The US tried to stay neutral, but joined the war in 1917 after German attacks on American ships. American soldiers helped bring the war to an end. Afterward, the US returned to peace, but not for long. The 1920s brought jazz, cars and radio, but also deep inequality and racial tensions. Then, in 1929, the Great Depression struck. The stock market crashed, banks failed, and millions lost their jobs. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt became president. He launched the New Deal, creating jobs, building roads, and helping the poor. Slowly, the country began to recover. But just as it regained strength, another global crisis emerged. In 1939, World War II began. The US entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. American factories turned to producing weapons, and millions of soldiers went overseas. By 1945, the war ended, with the US and its allies victorious. But the world had changed. The US had become one of the most powerful countries on Earth, and a new chapter was about to begin. After World War II, the United States stood as a global superpower, but victory brought new challenges. A new kind of war began, not fought with soldiers, but with ideas, influence, and nuclear threats. This was the Cold War, a long and tense rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union, Russia. America promoted democracy and capitalism, while the Soviet Union pushed communism. Both sides built up huge nuclear arsenals. Though they never fought directly, they battled through spies, space exploration, and proxy wars like the Korean War and the Vietnam War. At home, people feared communism. This led to a period of suspicion and paranoia known as McCarthyism, named after Senator Joseph McCarthy, who accused many Americans of being traitors with little evidence. Meanwhile, America was growing stronger and more modern. Highways were built, suburbs spread. In the 1950s, families bought TVs, and teenagers danced to rock and roll. But beneath the surface, deep inequalities remained, especially for African Americans. For centuries, Black Americans had faced racism, segregation, and violence. In the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement rose to demand change. Heroes like Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat on a bus, and Dr. Martin.
Change came slowly but surely. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 banned segregation and protected voting rights. Still, the fight for racial justice continued, and continues to this day. While the country wrestled with its past, it also looked to the future. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy challenged the nation to land a man on the moon. In 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon, declaring, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The 1970s and 80s brought more change. President Richard Nixon opened relations with China, but resigned in 1974 due to the Watergate scandal, a political cover-up that shocked the nation. President Ronald Reagan, elected in 1980, was known for his strong leadership during the end of the Cold War. By 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed and the Cold War ended. The US had emerged as the world's sole superpower. In the 1990s, under President Bill Clinton, the economy boomed. The internet began to reshape everything, how people communicated, learned, and did business. But the 21st century brought new trials. On September 11, 2001, terrorists attacked the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon, killing nearly 3,000 people. The country was devastated. President George W. Bush launched the War on Terror, leading to wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The economy crashed again in 2008, leading to a deep recession. The following year, Barack Obama was elected the first African-American president in US history. His presidency focused on economic recovery, healthcare reform, and diplomacy. Social movements gained momentum. Black Lives Matter, started in 2013, called for justice in cases of police violence against African Americans. Climate change, gender equality, and LGBTQ+ rights became central issues. In 2016, Donald Trump, a businessman with no prior political experience, was elected president. His time in office was marked by sharp political divisions, strong immigration policies, and the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, a global crisis that claimed millions of lives and changed daily life across the world. In 2020, Joe Biden was elected the 46th president, pledging to unite the country, fight climate change, and rebuild after the pandemic. By 2025, America had seen 46 presidents in total, each shaping the country in unique ways. By 2025, the United States of America stands as a nation with a deep and layered history, shaped by exploration, conflict, innovation, and resilience. Over the centuries, it has grown from a string of colonies into a powerful and complex country with 50 states, over 330 million people, and countless cultures, ideas, and beliefs blended together. The US is built on a foundation of democratic ideals. Though it has faced,
America's landscape is dotted with places that tell its story, each one a symbol of the country's past, power, and pride. The Statue of Liberty in New York City, the White House and US Capitol in Washington, D.C., Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, the Grand Canyon in Arizona, Yellowstone National Park, the Lincoln Memorial, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Alcatraz Island in San Francisco, and the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. In 2025, the United States remains a leader in science, technology, and global diplomacy. From Silicon Valley's tech giants to NASA's space missions, innovation is constant. The US sends missions to Mars, explores clean energy, and remains at the center of world trade and international politics. What truly defines the United States isn't just its landmarks, presidents, or inventions. It's the people. The country is a melting pot where cultures from all over the world come together. It's a place where ideas grow, voices are raised, and dreams are chased. Despite its imperfections, the US keeps striving to become a more perfect union. Every generation faces new challenges and pushes the nation forward, from native traditions to immigrant stories, from civil rights struggles to global victories. The United States continues its journey. In 2025, America is not perfect, but it is determined. It is loud, diverse, proud, and ever-changing. It is a nation of workers, thinkers, artists, and leaders, and its story is far from over.